First, I'd like to say congratulations to Scott Berry and Southern Miss. What a tremendous year, and it's tough and gut wrenching. When it doesn't work out at the end, and we know as well as anybody we've been on the other side of that. But as I've said, to a couple people, we all live in this state of this great state of Mississippi, which is just less than 3 million people, and you had 3 universities that were in the 20 to host, and 2 that ended up hosting, 1 that probably should have hosted that didn't get it, and all 3 teams make it to a regional final. 2 teams make it to a super regional. So it's a tough state, and I think sometimes when we're in our own bubble, we don't realize how good the other teams are. But Scott's done a wonderful job there, and today was one of those epic type regional finals, and so I'm proud of my guys. I'm proud of my guys for hanging in there, and it wasn't easy, and we talked about that. We talked about that last night. We talked about it this morning, and one of the mantras is don't wish it was easier, wish you were better. And we were good today, and we just made a couple more pitches than they did, or maybe a couple more swings of the bat. But again, Tim Elko, the legend continues, and then of course what the pitchers did and the guys did on short rest, no rest, guys that wanted the ball. Derek Diamond comes back, and throws, on a couple days rest. Doug comes and throws, and, gets us off the field in the bases loaded situation. And one of the cool things, because I'll say it before it's even asked, we asked the pitchers last night, get ready, because, all hands on deck today. We need to know if you're okay, if you're healthy. Can you give us, so know that question's coming tomorrow morning. And so if you need to see Josh tonight, if you need to see Josh again in the morning, Josh being our trainer, do that. And again, we need as many arms, available as possible. Well, last night I got home and got a text message from Doug Nikhazy, who he says, "Hey, Coach, I'll start, I'll relieve, I'll do whatever you need me to do, but I'm ready to go." And that those are special kids that really care about the program, and really kind of getting a little emotional. That makes what we do so cool. As a coach, that all they want to do is win, and they want to win for their teammates. They want to win for their university. So it was a good day for the Rebs.
We'll start questions off with Parrish Alford. Again, reminder, if you have questions, use the hand raise feature.
Hey, Mike, Southern was a little pitching depleted yesterday, coming through the losers bracket, but you guys didn't really exploit that like you seem to exploit their pitching today. What do you think was the difference?
Wow, it's a good question. I think it's what makes our game so great, Parrish. When we say, hey, it's just baseball, people that don't really love baseball or watch a lot of baseball don't get that. Their guys pitched well. The difference in a baseball game is that position, dictates so much of the outcome. And just because you're talented, sometimes you miss, and you miss over the plate, you make bad pitches. And so that's why anybody can beat anybody on a given day. And that's not trying to take anything away from those guys that pitched yesterday, because they got one of the best pitching staffs we faced all year. But I thought those guys that pitched last night were really sharp, and not only have good stuff, but made great pitches. And you could tell by the awkward swings that we got last night. Today, we seem to be a little bit better at the plate, and I think they weren't as good, they weren't as sharp today. So that's probably the biggest difference, is the pitchers probably weren't as sharp today.
Ben?
I'll be honest, Mike, I want to ask about Tim, but I feel like I keep asking the same questions at this point. So I'll put it to you this way. What else is there left to say about what he's doing right now?
I tried to tackle that in another direction, as either last night or nights are kind of getting confused about, he's just really good, but enough's enough. Like, holy cow. It's legendary. And as I said on the radio a few minutes ago, maybe this is a different one for you. What seemed like maybe one of the biggest tragedies of not just our season, but of somebody's career here, getting hurt in early April, has turned into one of the biggest legends that we'll all be talking about, for decades. And so we're seeing it live. So it's pretty cool.
Nick Suss?
Mike, I think it ended up being 3.5 hours worth of delays for you guys. Just how did you keep the guys focused in there? And what was that second delay like where you had an hour in between outs in the second
Yeah.
inning, keeping the guys in?
Well, credit them. It's not a lot of what we do, but just to kind of give you an idea, they had COVID testing this morning at 7:30. So, for a young person, 18 to 22 years old, they had to get up this morning, after late night last night, be here at 7:30 to get NCAA, tested for COVID. And then at 8 o'clock team meal, then we started, meetings, so we started meetings with the about their pitcher and so on. Then we go through batting practice and all the delays. But one of the things that this group has really been good at is handling those little things that are pain in the butt, adversity, whatever you want to call it, from all the injuries that we've talked about to other things that just haven't happened well. And so, we talk about, gosh, we'll never have another year like this COVID. Man, that just seems like a small part of what we've tackled this year. That was the story coming in, and that's been difficult, from not being in the locker room, together, not having team meetings, not having team meals, and all the things that, gosh, we all forgot about those things. We talked about that in the fall and early spring. So I think our guys have been tough and have kind of been weathered through that. And so a little bit of a rain delay or something like that, I think it's probably nothing for these guys.
Courtney?
Hi, Coach Courtney Robb, WCBI Sports in Columbus. In your opinion, what do you think was the biggest difference maker between your team yesterday, last night, and today?
Well, I think the biggest thing is, offensively, we were different today. And, I thought, not only, last night, we got, we scored 4 runs in the first, but part of that was their undoing. Their opening pitcher struggled a little bit. I think it was 2 walks and an HBP, and we only ended up getting, I think, 1 double, in the first inning and scored 4 runs. And then, the name escapes me. I want to say Harris, but Hall, so the last pitcher that they threw, just dominated us, the last 4 or 5 innings. But, today was different. We looked more like us offensively. We were able to put, chain some at bats together, as we call it, and put some more pressure, on them, and, get, some timely hits, and of course, some homers, and which, today was certainly at a premium.
Chase?
Yeah, Mike, you kind of answered this a second ago inadvertently, but just everything you guys have overcome injury-wise. I mean, I've been around a pretty long time, and you've had to kind of get through so many more things this year than most years to get to this point, win 44 games. I mean, proud, whatever you want to call it. They kind of just kept coming in a way that you don't always see.
No, you're right. And it's been so cool to watch and be a part of. And so, so much, we've played really good baseball, and we have some really great players, but the things that I think when we step back, you'll look at moments like today. Today will just be another win, and a lot of them. But when you look back and know that our backs were against the wall, and we started a freshman that actually was supposed to redshirt, and got his red shirt pulled, threw 60 pitches in relief, got the win, on Friday, and comes back and throws another 60 plus today. Derek Diamond, like I said, taking the ball, Doug Nikhazy sending me a text, and you would have had to, literally, you would have had to. He would have fought me today if he didn't pitch. And so, those types of things, I think, make today just a very special day, but one of a lot of special days this year where we just have overcome so much.
How did you kind of keep Jack loose, and what was kind of what was the limit where he might not have could come back there?
It was a pretty warm day, and it was pretty short. It didn't seem long. Tried to make sure that he didn't get too much air conditioning and stuff. It wasn't like the Weathersby in 2014, where he sat for about an hour and 15 minutes, and that was after maybe 4 innings or so. But he didn't look like he missed anything. I mean, when he came back out, he looked just as sharp, just as fresh. His command was just as good. So So, and you just don't know. But we had Adcock and Diamond, throwing and ready just in case he wouldn't. But he responded well to that.
Chris Muller.
Mike, obviously Taylor got named to the all-tournament team. He was absolutely dominant all weekend. What makes him so dominant, and just talk a little bit about his performance?
Yeah, great question. Never gets asked. What makes him so dominant? I haven't had a closer like him. And when I say like him, what I mean is he can beat you in a lot of different ways. He can beat you with an above average dominant fastball. He can beat you with his command of his fastball, where he can throw it in, he can throw it out, he can elevate it, he can throw it a little bit off the plate. And he's got a tremendous curveball and a slider and a changeup. And so there's not many times that you see a guy at the end of the game that's got 4 pitches who absolutely dominates the strike zone. I mean, he just, you're going to have to hit him because he's not walking you. And so I think what makes him so special is he can beat you in a lot of different ways. And when there's hitters that, seem like they can't catch up to his fastball, he'll go more fastballs. When he, thinks that they, are, starting to attack his fastball or sitting his fastball, he can break and ball them to death. He can throw changeups into the strike zone. I think it's just when they go up to the plate, they really can't have an approach because he can attack in a lot of different ways.
Final question from Ben.
Yeah, Mike, you already touched on Jack, but looking at what he's done, I mean, every single situation you put him in, be it midweek, closing games, relief, long relief, whatever, now starting, it seems like he just steps up and does exactly what you need him to do. Just his emergence in that way that you can use him in any possible way.
You're right. And that's what makes it so cool to watch a true freshman do that. It's good stuff. But most importantly is, he answers the bell, whatever you need him, and come in tough situations. And you also got to remember that you said all the right things, but also another prelude to that is, he's done it in the second half of the season where most of those outings have come against really good teams, right? It's been in the SEC tournament. It's been on the weekends. It's not like he got to cut his teeth in some preseason weekend, non-conference weekends or, just on a Tuesday night. And so, he's going to be a superstar here.